Hello and welcome to the presentation of the short paper These Scrolls Can Talk, Context Information for Web Collections. My name is Susanne van Eijkel. I'm a metadata specialist for digital preservation at KBNL, which is the National Library of the Netherlands, and I've written this article with Daniel Steinmeier, a digital preservation officer at the same library. Before I tell you a bit more about our short paper and why context information for web collections is important, I wanted to tell you a bit more about our web collections, the difference between the two, and what web archiving is exactly. So first of all, web archiving at KBNL. So we have two types of harvest, and I wanted to start with the selective harvest, which is a collection of 20,000 websites that have been harvested since 2007, and that focus on the Dutch history, culture, and language. So these are special collections on themes and events, like websites about the commemoration and celebration of 200 years Kingdoms of the Netherlands, the First World War, but also the COVID-19 pandemic, for instance. These websites are crawled at least once a year, and the collection now consists of about 38 terabytes of data. It is crawled, so it's collected. That's what crawling means, with the WCT, which is the web curator tool, and is developed by the National Library of New Zealand together with the National Library of the Netherlands. Access is only on site in our reading room in The Hague, and as you can see in the graph on the right of the slide, we see the historical growth of our KB web archive. And as you can see, for instance, in 2015, the collection grew. This is due to more personnel that was available to work on the web archive. But for instance, also in 2020, when the COVID pandemic reached its peak, we've created a new collection on COVID-19 together with the International Internet Preservation Consortium, also known as the IIPC. Next to our selective harvest, we also have a regional domain crawl. This is regional because we're only harvesting the Frisian domain as a pilot for an eventual national domain crawl. So we want to do the whole .nl domain, which is 6.5 million websites. But for now, we only did Friesland, which is a province in the northern part of the Netherlands, and which lies under the .frl domain. And we used Friesland because this is a part of the Netherlands with its own history, culture, and even language. So for example, you can find puns in the Frisian language on these websites. So it's a good domain that stands on its own in its way, but also a good way for us to test if we could do a national domain eventually. So now we're at the final stages of testing. We used a different tooling than the web curator tool because we wanted to continue a selective harvest at the same time that we executed our regional domain crawl. So we used the Net Archive Suite which is a web interface with the heritage scroller, just like the web curator tool. So it was a bit of the same for us. So it's good to understand heritage. Or have a good understanding of heritage, let me say it like that. And in that way you could understand the settings a bit better, how the software behaves. So that was good for us to test. Access is still to be determined. We're not sure how we want to provide that yet, and if we want to preserve that in our same system as we do with the selective harvest, for instance. And it's also good to zoom in a bit more on what is web archiving. It's maybe a bit of a too detailed story to tell it in all the details right now, but what it's good to remember is that there are three key points to keep in mind. First is that web archiving results in static objects that were captured at different points in time, so it's good to know that if you harvested a website, for example, today at this hour, you would create a snapshot, and it could be that the website that you've created results in a static object that never existed in that exact form on the live web. So for example, if you have the live web, you can browse and browse and browse forever if you wanted to. But with an archive website, that's not the same. It really depends on the settings of your crawler software, how deep you have harvested the website. So for example, if you were to collect only home pages, you would only need the primary seed for the homepage. But if you wanted to have a layer underneath so that you could, for example, have a menu and click on all the links in the menu, you have to be sure that you include them in your settings as well. Otherwise, it wouldn't be able to browse a bit further in your archived website. The same counts for like videos and images. Most of those are located on a different URL, so you have to include that URL if you wanted to harvest it as well. So it's good to know that your archive website is really the snapshot of that moment in time. And the settings that you use determine how complete and how authentic in terms of digital preservation your results are and will be. So then it's time to dive a bit deeper into our article. But first, it's good to know why do we exactly need context information. And I think this is a good example to explain why. This is a screenshot of a website, The Memory of the Netherlands, which is a Dutch website that has been archived by the Internet Archive, and it's from 2001. And as you can see, you see a lot of green, and you also see some words in blue, which implies that there's a link underneath. But it's not sure what we see here, because you really do not have a lot to go on. So I've asked myself these questions. So maybe it wasn't important to have the images, maybe it was optional. Maybe the URLs were not extracted from style sheets, so we do not have some information for these images. It could also be that it failed during harvesting, so it wasn't possible to harvest the images. Since this is an old website, 2001, it's also possible that the browser was not capable of displaying these images. And you can also wonder if the website really looked this way on the live web in 2001. So you could ask yourself these questions, but you really need a little more to go on to answer these. So we have defined 3 types of context information, namely a manual for quality assurance, the settings of your crawler software, and the collection description. That could give you a bit more explanation to a website like this that could be found in your archive, and to explain why did it really look this way. So spoiler, in this case, it was that the URLs were not extracted from the style sheets, so we do not have the information, so therefore we could not show you the information. So even with a browser emulation software technique, it wouldn't work, you would still see this. So our short paper is basically an answer to another paper which is called If These Scrolls Could Talk. And this paper talks about different elements that can make crawls talk in a way. And we've tried to implement this. So, and our title, because our crawls can talk with quality assurance, our settings, and our collection descriptions. So the first is process elements, so how a website harvested and archived. And our implementation of this is a QA and manual, so it's a quality assurance manual. This is done on selective harvest, so it's good to know that selective harvest is different than a domain harvest, because selective harvest, we're talking about like thousands of websites then, and with a domain harvest it would be millions. So it's still a lot, but we have more time to analyze the results more thoroughly instead of doing that with our domain crawl. So for example, if we would expect that a website would be larger than 1 gigabyte, and it turns out with quality assurance that it's smaller, we would find this website in our archive and see, hey, is there content missing based on earlier crawls? And it could be that content was moved to another domain, for example. So then it's logically that we would miss content, and then we can choose, do we want to include the other domain as well, so include a secondary seed, for example, or do we accept that the website is smaller now than we expected earlier? It's also possible that a website no longer exists because the domain name was sold, for example, and then we would add into our metadata that the website no longer exists, so therefore cannot be found in the archive anymore with a newer version. A second element is scope elements. So we ask ourselves the question, what is and what isn't included? And we focus this on the settings. So for a regional domain crawl, we've tested different settings because we want on the one hand, a complete website as possible, but on the other hand, it has to be more of a snapshot instead of really a selective harvest, which is harvested in more detail, where websites are harvested in more detail. So we have documented our settings, and it serves two purposes really. So on the one hand, it is important for archivists to understand what material is in our archives and to define appropriate preservation strategies. But on the other, it's also important that researchers have access to context information, because with access to that, they can reconstruct the life cycle of a digital object themselves. And with insight into the settings, this will help them understand the choices that were made in the process. So, for example, maybe it was technically very difficult to harvest a specific object. So it's possible that content was missing, but then researchers can still see how the original website has been transformed into the archival object and understand what happened exactly and why. And last but not least, we also have the context elements. So why do we harvest websites and how do we select them? And this was based on a collection description of a very important collection from us. So we have a collection based on the Access for All homepages. Access for All was one of the first internet providers in the Netherlands. And individuals could create their own homepages in the 1990s. And in a way, the creators of these websites were really pioneers, and therefore we think it's important to have these websites and that they are a very valuable source. And in the collection description, you can find more information about the collection, like how and when it was created, but also, for example, if content was missing and why so. So we have identified a lot of websites, like 19,000 as Access for All homepages. So you can see the full list, but maybe you see a website that wasn't available in our archive, but we know that once it existed, but maybe it was just not possible to harvest it, or it wasn't available anymore, so therefore it is not in our archive. And it's good to know for researchers why this was the case. So also the collection description can be a good way to understand our archive. So in conclusion, the context information can provide valuable insight into the process of creating an archival object from the files on the live web. And it's good for us archivists to understand this, but also the researchers that use our material. Then I also wanted to give a small insight to future steps. I'm sorry, there he is. Had a bit of a difficulty with the slide here. But one of the first things we have to do is migrate everything to Rosetta. So we have a new preservation system, which is Exhibits Rosetta, and we have to make sure that all the data, metadata is correctly stored there, of course. But we also have to preserve context information. So we have to think about how we want to preserve that into Rosetta and model everything into the system. Next to that, we want to do more with testing. As said, we've done a bit of testing on our regional domain crawl. So we've tested a few of the settings, but there are a lot more. And we want to have the perfect settings, of course, for our national domain crawl. So we have to do more there. And last but not least, we want to improve our discoverability, because we've archived all these web collections, and hopefully they will be in Rosetta in the near future, or maybe in the far future, who knows. But the idea is there, so now we have to still execute it. But researchers also have to find, of course, these collections and be able to understand it and use them for research. So that's what the future will bring. So thank you a lot for your attention. I will be happy to answer any questions in the live Q&A. And if there are any more questions, please feel free to contact me by my email address. Thanks.
Thank you. I am hoping that a question will appear, but not only questions on the collaborative notes are accepted, but also we can have some discussion until 1 o'clock Glasgow time. Does anyone in the audience like to start? in a way, a lot has been already discussed in the collaborative notes, but this might also raise your interest into asking further questions. We're all a bit exhausted, I guess. Just to get this running, Susanne, this approach that you used, I really liked it. You're a big library, right? Did you consider applying this approach to other collections, to say social media messages like Twitter or stuff like that?
Yeah, well, we're not really collecting social media just yet. We've been working with the Dutch Digital Heritage Network, and we did a pilot for that. But social media behaves a bit different than normal websites, because you cannot just crawl everything but well, it's also actually a problem for websites, because we are a big national library, but we do not have a legal deposit. So we need to have permission from everybody to harvest the website. So that's also a problem for our national domain, because we're not allowed to do that yet. But probably the law will change in the next few years. So we have we still won't have a legal deposit, but we have more opportunities to collect our national domain. But with social media, it's different, because, well, for example, for Twitter, if you post something, it's not your content anymore, but it's Twitter's content. So you need to have, of course, the acceptation from Twitter to be able to harvest this. And then, for example, for Instagram, it's different, because what would you harvest? I mean, you can have videos, you can have images. Do you want the names of the persons that react, and do you also want the reactions, or only the post itself? So you have to make a lot of choices. So it's technically difficult to harvest, but you also have the ethics there, which makes it a bit more difficult. So there are some pilots, and I know the National Library of Belgium is working on that as well. So on harvesting social media, but for now we're not doing it. We're just focusing on our selective harvest and our national domain pool.
What we actually did at Baden-Württemberg, we archived all Twitter messages of our chief data protection officer for the state administration, and he agreed. He urged us to do it. So we were legally safe on that, and we'd be glad if we could do more, but it's legal constraints, and it's also raising the funds for setting up all these endeavors. Fabiana has a question.
Yes, thank you. I can't see any other questions coming from the chat. So please, everyone, just think of some questions for our international speakers here. I have a question that I probably is going to be for Tom, Wagner, and Edward. You seem to have solved an issue in your processes that make some part of process more efficient by I suppose identify an issue in your organizations or people you represent, and then organizations you represent, and then applying these. My question is, do you think you can make it openly available? Is something you have thought through, or is something you can do? Let me start with Tom, because Tom, your process is very interesting. I'd be very interested to try out in my organization. So my question is, would you make it openly available? Would you share?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to discuss today. I'm Tom Smythe from the National Library and Archives Canada, and I can just mention that this is more or less hot off the presses. So the deployment of this, the development and deployment of this tool, which was very much a team effort. My thanks to both the digital integration and digital preservation areas. We have just deployed this tool, and the structure of the database is such that you can now push a button and export the content of the database in a document on demand. So this was part of the purpose, is that we wanted the ability to produce an updated file format policy whenever a client might need one that is completely up to date and to the minute. So yes, the LDFR, like our file format policy, can be shared. It will appear on our corporate web in the near future, and the script could easily be shared as well. I believe that it may actually already be available on GitHub. I think that's in process. The LDFR database itself, I try to document the principles for its construction in the written version of this paper for the proceedings of iPres. So there would be instruction there on how to go about building one. Because this would, of course, be specific to our institution and our capacities. So anybody who wanted to build something on similar concepts could do so that was specific to their institution.
Yes, we have at LSE, we have created a digital toolkit and made it available via GitHub as well. And I can hear you. We developed for our needs, but thinking that we could share and giving instructions and open up for anybody that wants to use the toolkit is available there. We would help to support to a certain extent and so on. But yes, I think it's important that when we create something like this, so we can share and we can, and by other usings, it validates our own work, doesn't it? It improves, certainly. So thank you, Tom.
I'm happy to discuss that with anyone who'd like to.
Right, and you should use the opportunity of iPres to get into contact with all those people who work on quite similar endeavors.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about Wikidata for preservation. I'm thinking about the pronom efforts, but I'm pretty sure that you're around and you're getting wary eyes from watching all those people talk. But let's enjoy that we can be around without really being around, like ghosts. We're spooking through the physical iPres environment. Any more questions, ideas, insults, anything?
There is some 2 questions that came from the public area, but also in the chat. Just get down there. So thanks for Keith for posting here as well in the chat. So it's for Tom. Do you try and find ways of feeding back the outcomes of LDFR into common infrastructures like Wikidata for digital preservation or others?
We have not done that yet, but that would be an important next step. And I think we would also start to contribute our findings to Pronom as well.
And a follow-up question is, do you have any plans to release the FP database? Well, I'll just ask that. It's the same question. Sorry. Yes, he has plans. Is that some of it is available in GitHub. Yeah. The ghost remark from K. Yes. And Wagner and Ward, I followed the questions to you guys as well. Wagner, you have said you are working with this institute, the Brazilian Institute of Museums, and you have developed these processes with them. But is it something that you would be open up to the Brazilian community or world community more generally?
Yeah. Thanks. I'm Wagner from Unicamp, from University of Campinas, Brazil. Well, we did these steps and it's already on GitHub. We are towards on the direction to this application that suggests the labels to every ancient object that arrives into the museum. So we'll be open, but in this part of the process, we already have just the data set, the steps to have the data set. So on GitHub you can find a script that you can fit into a database and will pop up with the output will be the concise data set.
Sorry.
I don't know if it's yeah.
Thank you, Wagner.
Just one thing, where at this step we have just the Brazilian museums, but we pretend to expand the database to international museums and to generalize the model. So this step will be just a example for the Brazilian museum, particularly museums inside of Brazil.
You should get in touch with the Trust Collections Trust in the UK. I don't know if they have anything similar, but I think they would be interested to hear from you.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, there's another question, Wagner, for you. Do you have an idea of how much manual effort might have been prevented through your work as yet? Maybe even if you project it into the years to come, how many effort will be prevented?
This is hard to measure, but for example, today, researcher or museologist can catalog approximately 7 objects per day. So this is kind of hard, and sometimes had a lot of misunderstanding on the catalogation process. I would say that we have approximately 30 or 35 objects per day arriving in a museum, and we have less than 30% being cataloged. So this is, I think we are missing some stuff, and we're now waiting for another things like those museums that caught on fire, and we now lose those archives.
Thank you. And another remark from Alexis Tyndall. She asks you, Wagner, if you are familiar with the Artificial Intelligence for Libraries, Archives and Museums network. Thanks for the hint, I guess. They've got meetups, and she gave you an address. And then there's a question from Edouard. Open source and open data are part of our strategy in France. All tools developed since 2015 with public funds have been released on GitHub. Right, yeah, very good development. I think we will release code developed in the Pell-Mell project before the end of the year. Another nice news around this code issue. I think that computer guys, all the computer guys around are in a fairly much better situation than about 10 years before, because so much code is being contributed to the community. That's really good news.
Thanks, Alexis. I didn't know about that, this AI, but I will be happy to see it. Thanks.
We're heading towards the full hour, but there's still time for another question. And I'd like to ask Edouard. You said in the results that presence of an expert is mandatory. Presence of what kind of expert? An archivist or a linguist or a computer scientist? What kind of expert did you mean?
In that case, it was the presence of an expert in archival science and archivist, records manager in or professor in archival science, because we already have experts in NLP technologies in the project, so with linguistics. So it was the knowledge of the ministry and the knowledge of the concept that are used in the ministry and that will be useful for classifying all emails that were very important, that were missing in the project team in Angers.
Well, we are really impressed in Germany, because the two countries who are doing really well on email archiving are now France and the US. You've made an amazing step by starting this program, and we're still keen for setting up something similar, but right now there's still no big effort, no research project like RATOM, EPAD, and there are some more in the US, as I learned these days, and also your project. And I think it is time to deepen this issue in the international sphere, in my view. Fabi's clapping. Yeah, we should all be clapping and close the session, right? Unless there are no...
We actually finish on time. That's the great.
Amazing.
Yay!
This is because of you all, especially for the presenters. It's been lovely with you. And enjoy the rest of iPres. You will meet me again in 1 hour. I have to go home now. And then you'll see me with another background in an hour in the next session.
I think it's good to say that the next in the program is lunchtime, so just relax, especially the presenters, and then come back at 2 o'clock for what is next in the program. Thank you very much.
Right. Bye-bye.
Thanks. And also thanks to Fabi and Kai. Bye.
My pleasure.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.